My family spent years criticizing everything about my boyfriend, but the moment they fell into financial ruin, suddenly he became that nice young man who could help us out. The hypocrisy was almost as painful as their betrayal. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to see more real-life stories that will leave you shocked. I never thought I'd be in this position. Standing in my parents' living room, watching them cry as they begged me for money. The same parents who had refused to even let my boyfriend Jacob sit at their Christmas table last year. The irony wasn't lost on me. My name is Hazel Bennett. I'm 28 years old and work as a financial analyst at a prestigious firm in Boston. I met Jacob 3 years ago at a coffee shop near my apartment. He was charming, intelligent, and ambitious. Everything I wanted in a partner. But there was one problem. He didn't come from money. And in my family, that was a cardinal sin. The Bennetts had been wealthy for generations. My father, Richard, was a successful investment banker, and my mother, Elizabeth, came from old money. They lived in a sprawling colonial home in an exclusive neighborhood and sent me to the best private schools. They had my entire life mapped out. Prestigious college, respectable career, and marriage to someone from our circle. For the most part, I followed their plan. I went to an Ivy League school, got a great job, and was well on my way to becoming exactly who they wanted me to be. Then I met Jacob. He grew up in a small town in Ohio, put himself through state college, and was working as a high school teacher while pursuing a master's degree in education. He was kind, hardworking, and genuinely passionate about making a difference in his students' lives. I fell in love almost immediately. When I first told my parents about him, they seemed cautiously optimistic. But when they learned about his background and career choice, their attitude changed completely. "A teacher, Hazel? Really?" my mother had said with a disapproving frown. "What kind of life can he provide for you? For our future grandchildren?" My father was even less subtle. "You can do better than that, sweetheart. What about Michael Sullivan? His father and I go way back, and he just made partner at his law firm." I tried to make them see Jacob for who he was, not what he earned or where he came from. I brought him to family dinners, where they were coldly polite but never welcoming. He tried so hard to win them over, bringing thoughtful gifts and engaging in conversations about their interests. But nothing worked. Things came to a head last Christmas. I had been dating Jacob for almost 2 years by then, and we were talking about moving in together. I wanted him to be part of our family holiday, so I asked my parents if he could join us for Christmas dinner. "I don't think that's appropriate, Hazel," my mother said. "Christmas is for family." "He is family to me," I insisted. My father's face hardened. "Not yet, he isn't. And frankly, I'm not sure he ever will be." Their rejection hurt more than I could express. I spent Christmas Eve with Jacob and his roommate in their small apartment, exchanging simple gifts and eating takeout Chinese food. It was one of the warmest, most genuine Christmas celebrations I'd ever had, despite the pain of my family's rejection. On Christmas Day, I went to my parents' house alone. The table was set perfectly, as always. My older brother Ethan and his wife Claire were there with their 1-year-old son. My younger sister Madison was home from college. Everything was picture perfect, but I felt hollow inside. "Where's your friend?" Madison asked innocently as we sat down for dinner. "He's not welcome here," I said quietly, looking directly at my parents. My mother sighed dramatically. "Don't start, Hazel. Not today." "When then? When are we going to talk about how you've treated the man I love?" My father put down his fork with a clatter. "If you're so unhappy with our hospitality, perhaps you should leave." I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Maybe I should. I left my parents' house that day and didn't speak to them for 3 months. Eventually, we reached an uneasy truce. They stopped openly criticizing Jacob, and I stopped bringing him around them. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only way I could maintain relationships with both my family and the man I loved. Jacob and I moved in together last spring. We found a modest but comfortable apartment in Cambridge, close enough to his school and my office. He never complained about my family's treatment of him, though I knew it hurt. "They're just protective of you," he would say. They'll come around eventually. I wasn't so sure, but I never imagined what would finally bring them around would be their own financial disaster. The call came on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. I was cooking dinner while Jacob graded papers at our kitchen table. When I saw my mother's name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. Our last conversation had been tense, with her making passive-aggressive comments about my alternative lifestyle choices, as if living in an apartment with a teacher was joining a commune. But something told me to pick up. "Hello? Hazel?" My mother's voice was shaking. "We need to talk. Can you come over tomorrow?" I looked at Jacob, who glanced up from his papers with concern written across his face. "What's going on, Mom?" It's your father. His firm. There's been a problem. Please, just come over. We need to talk in person." I agreed to visit them the next day after work. I spent the night tossing and turning, wondering what could have happened. My father's investment firm had always been rock solid. He was a partner, for God's sake. What kind of problem could possibly shake my unflappable father? The next day, I found out. As it turned out, my father's firm had been making increasingly risky investments over the past few years. When the market took an unexpected downturn, they lost millions. My father, as one of the senior partners, was personally liable for a significant portion of the debt. They were facing bankruptcy, potential legal troubles, and the loss of nearly everything they owned. "How bad is it?" I asked, sitting stiffly on the edge of their leather sofa. The house already felt different, colder, emptier, as if the warmth had been sucked out along with their financial security. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. His normally impeccable appearance was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "We're going to lose the house," he said flatly. "Most of our investments, our savings, everything." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We've spoken with our lawyers. There might be a way to salvage something, but we need liquidity. Fast." I nodded, trying to process what they were telling me. My parents, who had always been the epitome of financial success and stability, were broke. It seemed impossible. Then my father cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "Hazel, we know about your trust fund." My stomach dropped. The trust fund my grandparents had set up for me. The one that had matured when I turned 25. The one worth just over $500,000 that I had been saving to eventually buy a home, maybe start my own business someday. "Dad, We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate," my mother interjected quickly. "It would just be a loan. Once we get back on our feet, we'll pay you back. With interest." I sat there, stunned into silence. They weren't just telling me about their financial troubles, they were asking me to bail them out, with money that had been specifically left to me by my grandparents. Money they had no legal claim to. "I need time to think about this," I finally managed to say. My father's face hardened slightly. "We don't have much time, Hazel. The creditors are circling." I left their house in a daze. When I got home, Jacob took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. I told him everything. $500,000, he whispered when I finished. "That's your entire trust fund." I nodded miserably. "They're saying it's a loan, but you know how these things go. If their situation is as bad as they say, I might never see that money again." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised me. "Maybe you should help them." I stared at him. "What?" "They're your family, Hazel. Despite everything, they raised you. They love you. If you can help them, maybe you should." His generosity of spirit was one of the things I loved most about him. But in this case, I wasn't sure it was warranted. "They wouldn't even let you come to Christmas dinner," I reminded him. "They've made it clear how they feel about you. About us." He shrugged. "People can change. Maybe this is what they need to reassess their priorities." I wasn't convinced. And the more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became about the timing of their request. Just the week before, I had mentioned to my sister that Jacob and I were thinking about getting engaged soon. Had that information made its way back to my parents? Were they trying to drain my resources to prevent me from building a life with the man they disapproved of? I decided to sleep on it. But when I woke up the next morning, I knew what I had to do. I called my parents and told them I'd meet them for dinner to discuss the situation. Then I called Jacob and asked him to join us. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "I don't want to make things more complicated for you." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "If they want my help, they need to accept who I am and who I love. We're a package deal now." That evening, we walked into the restaurant together, hand in hand. I spotted my parents immediately, sitting stiffly at a corner table. Their faces when they saw Jacob told me everything I needed to know. Shock, followed quickly by careful composure. They hadn't expected this. "Mom, Dad," I said as we approached the table. "You remember Jacob?" My father stood and extended his hand mechanically. "Of course. Hello, Jacob." My mother merely nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. We sat down, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Hazel, we were hoping to discuss a private family matter tonight." I met his gaze steadily. "Jacob is family to me. Anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of him." Another awkward silence. Then my mother spoke up, her voice tight. "Very well. Have you given our request any thought?" I nodded. "I have. And I'm willing to help, under certain conditions." My parents exchanged a glance. "What conditions?" my father asked cautiously. I took a deep breath. "First, I won't give you the entire sum. I'll loan you $250,000, half of my trust fund. Second, we'll draw up a legal agreement with repayment terms. And third," I reached for Jacob's hand on the table, "you need to accept Jacob as part of my life. Completely. No more cold shoulders, no more exclusion from family events. He's the man I love, and if you want my help, you need to respect that." My mother's eyes darted between Jacob and me, calculation evident in her expression. My father looked like he was swallowing something bitter, but they were desperate, and we all knew it. "Of course," my father finally said. "Jacob is welcome in our home. We may have been hasty in our judgment." Jacob squeezed my hand under the table but remained silent. He knew, as I did, that this wasn't a genuine change of heart. It was a transaction. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start. The lawyer's office was coldly professional, much like the document sitting in front of us. I glanced at Jacob, who gave me an encouraging nod. My parents sat across the table, their expressions a mixture of humiliation and barely concealed resentment. "So we're all clear on the terms?" asked Mr. Harrington, my attorney. I'd hired him independently, despite my father's insistence that we could use the family lawyer. That particular suggestion had only strengthened my resolve to protect myself legally. "Crystal clear," my father replied, his voice clipped. $250,000 to be repaid over 5 years with 3% interest. Quarterly payments beginning 6 months from today. Mr. Harrington nodded. "And the collateral?" My mother flinched visibly. This had been the most contentious point of our negotiations. Since my parents were losing their home, they had limited assets to offer as security for the loan. Eventually, we'd settled on their vacation property in Cape Cod, a small cottage that had somehow been placed in my mother's name years ago and wasn't subject to the creditor's claims. The Cape Cod property, my father confirmed tightly, though I still believe a handshake should be sufficient between family members. I resisted the urge to point out that a handshake hadn't been sufficient when they'd excluded the man I loved from our family gatherings. Instead, I simply said, "It's standard practice for loans of this size, Dad. It protects everyone." In the weeks that followed, my parents began the painful process of downsizing their life. They sold most of their art collection and my mother's jewelry. They found a modest rental in a neighboring town and began moving out of the home they'd lived in for almost 30 years. I helped when I could, packing boxes and sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. Jacob came with me a few times, and to my surprise, my parents were civil, even friendly at times. My father asked about Jacob's teaching, seeming genuinely interested in his students and curriculum. My mother invited him to help decide which books should be kept and which donated. "Your boyfriend has good taste in literature," she remarked one evening as we were taking a break. She said boyfriend instead of Jacob, or that teacher, which I considered progress. He's a literature teacher, Mom, I reminded her. He has a master's degree. She nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Yes, of course. I knew that. These small moments gave me hope that perhaps something good might come from this crisis after all. Maybe seeing their wealth and status stripped away was forcing my parents to reevaluate what really mattered. But then came Thanksgiving, and I realized how fragile this new dynamic really was. We'd agreed to have the holiday at my parents' rental house. It would be their first major family gathering since losing their home. Jacob and I brought side dishes and wine, arriving early to help with preparations. Madison came home from college, and Ethan, Claire, and their son arrived just before dinner. Things seemed to be going well at first. The house was small but cozy, and my mother had done her best to create a festive atmosphere despite their reduced circumstances. We gathered around the table, which was noticeably less elaborate than in previous years, but still beautifully set. My father raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, "to family and to new beginnings. This year has taught us what truly matters." He looked around the table, his gaze lingering on me. "And to Hazel, whose generosity has given us a chance to rebuild." Everyone raised their glasses. I felt a flush of warmth, both from the acknowledgement and from the genuine emotion in my father's voice. Maybe things really were changing. Then Ethan spoke up. "Speaking of rebuilding, Dad, have you given any more thought to that business opportunity I mentioned? Now might be the perfect time to get in on the ground floor." My father's expression brightened. "Actually, yes. Your friend's venture capital firm sounds promising. We had lunch last week, and he thinks with my connections, we could put together a substantial investment pool." I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. "Investment pool? Dad, you're using the money I loaned you to start a new venture?" The table fell silent. My father looked uncomfortable. "Not exactly, Hazel. We're using some of it for living expenses, of course. But the best way to pay you back quickly is to generate new income. By gambling on another high-risk investment?" I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Isn't that what got you into this mess in the first place?" My mother cut in quickly. "It's hardly gambling, dear. Your father has decades of experience, and Ethan's friend comes highly recommended." I looked at Ethan, who suddenly seemed very interested in his mashed potatoes. I'd always suspected that he shared my father's appetite for risk, but I'd hoped he'd learned something from our parents' downfall. "I think what Hazel means," Jacob said carefully, "is that conventional wisdom might suggest focusing on stability right now, rather than new ventures." My father's face hardened. "With all due respect, Jacob, I've been managing investments since before you were born. I think I understand financial strategy better than a high school teacher." And just like that, the old contempt was back, barely concealed beneath a veneer of politeness. "Dad," I said sharply, "that was uncalled for." My father waved a dismissive hand. "I didn't mean anything by it. I'm just saying that this is my area of expertise." "The expertise that just lost you everything?" The words were out before I could stop them. My mother gasped. Madison looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Ethan's son began to cry, sensing the tension. My father put down his knife and fork with deliberate care. "I think you're forgetting who put food on your table for 25 years, Hazel. Who paid for your education, your clothes, your first car. One setback doesn't erase a lifetime of success. And one loan doesn't erase years of disrespect toward Jacob," I countered. I thought things were changing, but clearly, I was wrong. Jacob put his hand on my arm. "Hazel, it's okay." "No, it's not okay," I insisted. "They're taking my money my grandparents left specifically for me, and pouring it into another risky scheme while continuing to look down on you. That's not okay." My father stood up abruptly. "I think it might be best if you two left." I stood as well, trembling with anger. "Gladly." The winter months passed in a blur of cold tension. Jacob and I had minimal contact with my parents, limited to a few stilted phone calls and an awkward Christmas card exchange. Despite everything, I still worried about them. Were they managing financially? Had they invested my money in Ethan's friend's venture? Were they going to be able to make the first loan payment, due in April? Madison kept me informed about their situation during our regular sister lunches. "They're putting on a brave face," she told me in February, "but I can tell they're struggling. Mom started looking for work, but at her age and with no recent experience." I nodded, stirring my coffee absently. "And Dad? Is he still pursuing that investment with Ethan's friend?" Madison looked uncomfortable. "I think so. He doesn't talk about it much, but Ethan mentioned something about an initial capital call last time I saw him." I sighed. It was exactly what I'd feared. My father was doubling down on the same risky behaviors that had led to his downfall, only this time with my money. Despite this cloud hanging over my relationship with my family, my personal life with Jacob was flourishing. We'd been talking more seriously about marriage, looking at rings online and discussing what kind of wedding we might want. Simple, we both agreed. Meaningful. Focused on love and commitment, not show. One Saturday in March, Jacob suggested a walk along the Charles River. It was still cold, but the sun was shining, hinting at the spring to come. As we strolled hand in hand, he suddenly stopped and turned to face me. "Hazel," he said, his voice oddly formal, "these past 3 years have been the happiest of my life." My heart began to race as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I was going to wait until I'd saved enough for something more elaborate, but then I realized that's not who we are. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring with a small, perfect diamond. "I love you for your heart, your mind, your spirit, not for your trust fund or your family connections. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, of course I will." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and we kissed as joggers and cyclists passed by, some of them smiling at the obvious proposal scene. "It's beautiful," I said, admiring the ring in the sunlight. "It's exactly what I would have chosen. I wanted something that represented us," he said. "Not too flashy, but solid, genuine." We decided to have a small engagement party at our apartment the following weekend. I sent invitations to my close friends from work, Jacob's colleagues from school, and, after some hesitation, my family. Madison accepted immediately. Ethan and Claire said they would try to come. My parents, I didn't really expect them to attend, given how things had been left at Thanksgiving. But to my surprise, my mother called the day after receiving the invitation. "We'd love to come," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Is there anything we can bring?" I was momentarily speechless. No, that's not necessary. Just yourselves." "All right then, we'll see you Saturday." I hung up, puzzled by their acceptance. Were they making a genuine effort to reconcile? Or was there another motive? I got my answer the night of the party. My parents arrived exactly on time, bearing an expensive bottle of champagne and a small wrapped gift. They were polite to Jacob, if somewhat stiff, and made appropriate small talk with our friends. But I could tell something was off. My father kept checking his phone, his expression growing increasingly anxious. My mother's smile was fixed and brittle. About an hour into the party, as we were preparing to make a toast to our engagement, my father pulled me aside. "Can we speak privately for a moment? It's important." I followed him into our bedroom, concern mounting. "What's going on, Dad?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness I'd rarely seen from him. "There's no easy way to say this, Hazel. The investment, it's not going well." My stomach dropped. "How not well?" "The first round of funding fell through," he admitted. "Without it, the entire venture is at risk. We've put in almost all of the money you loaned us. $200,000. I stared at him in disbelief. $200,000? Out of the $250 I loaned you? Dad, that was supposed to help you stabilize your lives, not finance another risky venture. It was supposed to be a sure thing," he insisted. Brandon had commitments from major players. Something must have spooked them. I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. "And now you're here to tell me that you can't make the first loan payment. Is that it?" He nodded miserably. we're going to need more time, and possibly more money to salvage the investment. I laughed incredulously. More money? You've got to be kidding me. Hazel, please, he pleaded. If we don't secure additional funding, we'll lose everything we've put in so far. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw not the confident, successful man who had raised me, but a desperate gambler chasing his losses. It was a revelation that broke my heart and strengthened my resolve in equal measure. No, I said firmly, not another penny. In fact, I want you to pull out whatever is left of my loan. Today. That's not possible, he protested. The funds are committed. If we pull out now, we lose everything. As opposed to losing everything later? I asked. Because that's where this is headed, Dad. You know it as well as I do. A knock at the door interrupted us. Jacob poked his head in. Sorry to intrude, but people are asking for that toast. I nodded, taking a moment to compose myself. We'll be right there. When Jacob closed the door, I turned back to my father. We'll talk about this later. Right now, I'm going to go celebrate my engagement with the man I love and our real friends. People who care about us, not what we can do for them. My father flinched at the implication, but didn't argue. We rejoined the party, where I plastered on a smile and raised a glass to my future with Jacob. My parents left soon after, my mother hugging me stiffly and whispering, "We'll figure this out." But I knew there was nothing to figure out. The money was gone, or would be soon. My parents hadn't changed. They'd just gotten better at hiding their disdain for my choices behind a veneer of acceptance when they needed something from me. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrington, my attorney. I need to know my options, I told him. My parents have essentially defaulted on our agreement by investing the money in a failing venture, rather than using it for living expenses as they claimed they would. He was sympathetic, but realistic. The agreement doesn't specify how they could use the funds, Hazel. Legally, they're only in default if they fail to make the scheduled payments. Which they've already told me they can't do, I pointed out. Then your recourse is to proceed with foreclosure on the Cape property, he explained. But given that they're family, you might want to consider other options first. I thanked him and hung up, feeling conflicted. The Cape house had been in my mother's family for generations. Taking it from them felt unnecessarily cruel, even after everything they'd done. But simply forgiving the loan felt like enabling their self-destructive behavior. Jacob found me sitting at our kitchen table, lost in thought. "Rough morning?" he asked gently. I looked up at him. This man who had stood by me through everything, who had never once complained about my family's treatment of him, who had supported me even when it meant losing half my trust fund. My parents invested almost all of my loan in Ethan's friend's venture, I told him. And now it's failing. They can't make the first payment, and they want more money to salvage the investment. Jacob sat down across from me. "What are you thinking of doing?" I took a deep breath. "I'm thinking it's time for some tough love. I won't foreclose on the Cape house yet, but I'm going to make it clear that there will be no more money under any circumstances. And I'm going to insist they get financial counseling if they want any further consideration from me." He reached across the table and took my hand. "That sounds fair. Compassionate, but firm. And I'm thinking—" I hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I'm thinking we should set a wedding date. Soon. Something simple, with just the people who truly support us." Jacob smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way I loved. "That sounds perfect." Later that day, I called my parents and arranged to meet them for coffee. I laid out my terms clearly. No more money, mandatory financial counseling, and a revised payment plan once they were back on their feet. They were subdued, perhaps finally realizing the gravity of their situation. "We've been foolish," my mother admitted, surprising me. "We were so desperate to maintain our lifestyle, our status, that we couldn't see what we were doing to ourselves. To you." My father nodded, looking genuinely chastened. "Your conditions are fair, Hazel. More than fair, given what we've done." I studied their faces, searching for signs of manipulation, but found only exhaustion and regret. "There's one more thing," I said. Jacob and I are setting a wedding date for this summer. It will be small and simple, nothing like what you probably envisioned for me. But it's what we want. My mother's eyes welled with tears. We'd be honored to be there if you'll still have us. That depends, I said frankly. Can you finally accept Jacob, truly accept him, as my choice, as my husband, as part of your family? My father reached across the table and took my hand. We can. We will. It took losing everything to make us see what really matters. I hope it's not too late. I wasn't naive enough to believe that one conversation could undo years of prejudice and materialism, but it was a start. A foundation we could build on if they were sincere. As I walked home from the coffee shop, I felt lighter somehow. The money was gone, yes, but in its place was something potentially more valuable. The beginning of an honest relationship with my parents, based on who we really were, not who they wanted us to be. And I had Jacob, kind, steady, loving Jacob, who had shown me what truly mattered all along. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable. My parents had refused my boyfriend at Christmas, only to beg for my financial bailout months later. But in the process, we all learned what family really means, and it has nothing to do with money.